So, hi Ben.
Hi.
Hito Stella has talked about the idea of the internet moving offline, the behavior and actions of the virtual manifesting themselves in the physical. So, if the internet has moved offline, I believe that humans are moving online, spending and occupying more of their life in the virtual realm. So, to what extent are the lines becoming too blurry to tell the difference between online and offline, reality and virtuality?
Hmm. So, so I understand the kind of root of this discourse. I'm imagining that you are familiar with some of they're not quite movements. Actually, let me ask you a question. In terms of how you'd like me to address this question, is it useful to talk about it in the context of art, given the Hito style reference?
It's not useful, let's put it that way. I would like some more diverging opinions than the ones that I have from the design world, yeah.
So I guess the thing to say is that I was part of this movement that's referred to as post-internet, and now, well, within that moment, kind of rejected it because I sensed there was a kind of confluence, a misconflation of the assumed politics of technology and the nature of the internet with the politics of the people that were involved in that movement.
Right.
And so I have to preface it with that. But that movement and that attempt to produce artworks was an expression of, I guess, a kind of false duality that there existed an online or an offline, and was an attempt to speak about how individual identities are constituted through a kind of online reference point, and that being a real marker of a kind of collapse between the way in which one constitutes their identity or their brand versus how one constructs their individual practice.
Right.
And that really marked that moment in which social media became much more present and everybody used that. It feels to me that we're kind of in a different moment now,
right,
where the kind of subject matter of the nature of the online, the offline is less present because everybody is present within those spaces.
Okay.
And I think, but then simultaneously there's a kind of strange backlash against those technologies. And I for one, somebody that doesn't really use social media anymore. I only use Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm aware that most people are on Instagram, but I elect not to use it.
Right.
And so I think we're in a funny moment of a kind of turn against technology as a result of, I think, individuals feeling that they no longer have agency to act within that kind of technological surface. And it's not to say that people are becoming Luddites or in the way that people perceive Ludditism to exist.
Right.
I just think that there's a kind of shift. The last thing that I'd say on this, because I think it's a messy, contradictory answer because it's a messy, contradictory terrain.
Right.
But the last thing I would kind of point to in answering it is the discourses of people like Donna Haraway, the Cyborg Manifesto, and the field that's known as cyborg anthropology, I think speaks to this much more elegantly than I could necessarily do.
Okay. You touched a bit on some of this. Do you have any sort of shorthand answers to what do you think this will cause? I mean, you talked a bit about how it's not maybe relevant to talk about it as a post-internet phase, but what do you think are some of the future causes of this sort of distinction becoming, or this lack of distinction between our two different worlds?
So I would point to name, but the person who started the Pirate Bay.
Yeah.
And when he was put on trial, the judge used the term IRL. And his response was, I don't use the term IRL, I use the term AFK, away from keyboard, because there's not necessarily any distinction between the two. And that was, I think, probably about a decade ago now that he made that statement. And, I think that remains true. So I don't think that you can carve a line between these two kind of spaces. I think that what we're in right now, some people refer to as a kind of age of entanglement.
Yeah.
That these things are kind of irrevocably meshed. And the ability, it points in philosophical terms to an attempt to make a distinction between nature and technology. And I think that only suggests a poor definition or a poor understanding of what technology is and what nature is. And it's much clearer to say that these things are entangled and they always have been.
Cool. Okay, so next question. So in your conversation with Ian Chang and Nora Khan, you mentioned a little bit about the simulations that we live within. So what do you think will happen when our real emotions to fictive or simulated narratives on online platforms are no longer distinguishable to reality?
I think we're living through that question right now.
Right.
In respect to things like fake news, where people's ability to distinguish between truth and fiction is much more pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I guess I have this kind of it's not quite pessimism. Can't quite, the word isn't available to me right now, but I guess in this moment, I have this overwhelming sense that much of what we're going through, we have experienced many times before, throughout history, and that these events or these experiences or perception shifts in reality are cyclical. They just come with different styles and different textures. And in terms of how that manifests in this moment, we talk about fake news, but in many ways it's the kind of realization that the news has always been fake. And it's interesting if you think of philosophers that have theorized on some of these ideas previously. So if you take the kind of the thinker on simulation, like somebody like Baudrillard, it was also Baudrillard that said the Iraq War didn't happen. And so a lot of these ideas have kind of some precedence in recent kind of philosophical thought. So we're living through this kind of strange moment of a set of realizations that seem entirely obvious now, and were true before, but are only coming into a kind of public discourse. And then I think there's a kind of interesting Gnostic dimension to it, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Gnostics. They break off from the early formation of Christian church. And the Gnostics had...
Gnostics, N-O-S-T-I-C?
Gnosticism is spelled Gnosticism.
Okay.
And the Gnostics have this idea that we are all living in simulation, and that we only need to realize it, and then we can recognize ourselves as truly divine beings. And there's a whole cosmology around Gnosticism. And the Matrix, in that sense, is a Gnostic tale.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting given the emergence of certain strands of thought and the sort of theological questions that are raised in this moment in respect to the emergence of certain technologies, that we have proliferation of these kind of narratives about the construction of reality coming into the present. And somebody that you could probably look to as being more legible within a more contemporary discourse would be science fiction writers like Philip K. Dick, and particularly his book Valis, which talks of the simulation of the black ionism and talks about the idea that the empire never ended.
What was his name? Philip K. Dick. And the book was Valis.
Valis. Valis. And Philip K. Dick, he wrote the book that informed Blade Runner, that informed Minority Report, that informed...
Okay.
An incredibly prolific writer, but has a lot of interesting things to say in relation to kind of more ancient theories of simulation theory.
Okay, cool. Are you familiar with Lil Michaela? You heard of her?
No.
So Lil Michaela, if you're near a computer, you could just quickly look her up. It's kind of interesting. She's a virtual avatar influencer. In the sense that she...
yes, I am familiar.
Yeah, so
the
she...
first one.
Right, yeah, the one who's just digitally generated and is like psycho transmutate onto someone else's body all the time.
Yeah.
So if we take Lil Michaela as an example, the popular digital, like this sort of person, and sort of how much time people are investing into her and influencing and the sort of the space that she occupies, does it matter that she's not real?
I think the medium of technology, and in this instance, the use of advanced CGI, I think that these kind of technologies are what we will see emerge over the next couple of years with respect to deep fake, the use of machine learning in order to augment video of people speaking. This kind of famous video of somebody augmenting Obama giving a speech that he didn't give and you can't distinguish.
Yeah.
But we're going to see the emergence of more and more of these kind of deep fakes that are using AI in order to produce events that never happened. I often think that, and I particularly think in this moment, that the medium of these technologies and the effect that they're having in some ways distracts us from something that's always kind of been present. Or not, maybe it's wrong to say always, but it's a distraction in terms of, if you consider reality television or the Kardashians or Kanye West or, any number, actually maybe not Kanye West, but any number of these individuals, these highly constructed like simulations are kind of no different than the construction of a CGI character, and the question of how much time people spend with that avatar is no different really than how much time people spend with TV personalities. Perhaps the thing that's different about this is the fact that on one side there's the potential for these CGI characters to have some type of autonomy, and that's a highly speculative type of potential because it infers that artificial intelligence is going to be able to advance to a certain position. But the other thing that's different is that these identities have the potential to be owned or to be ownerless, and that produces a set of kind of new conditions. So you could have the construction of an identity that is owned by cooperative people, and those individuals could place all of their effort and energy into constructing that identity. But again, there are kind of historical examples of that. Groups like Luther Blissett, for example, where people created an identity and then put it out into the world. There's a kind of sort of artistic, historical, and political history to
I think I might go back to that point you mentioned about constructed identities. Um, don't know if this question is even relevant anymore. Can we say that platform was one thing? So, so I mean, maybe just like cap off this sort of discussion about the distinction between digital and physical in a broader sense. So, is there a point? What's the point of continuing to make a distinction between digital and physical life?
My gut impulse was to say there's no point, but then I just have to think about that for a moment, whether I want to say that. I guess the problem with the essential issue here is that the majority of the platforms and the infrastructure that is digital in this moment, and perhaps it's always been this way, but it feels that it's more tightly controlled by a smaller set of companies than ever before. Whether that is, the big five like Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, etc., or it's also the kind of telcos that control our connection to the internet, whether it's through your phone or through broadband. The problem with saying that there's no distinction between the two means that there's a part of your own identity and your life that is under the control of those systems. And so to say that those two things don't exist as a duality anymore means that you're insisting upon giving up a certain degree of control over oneself, and that wasn't the early aspirations of any of these technologies. So I'm hesitant to say it. I think in terms of perceivable reality, there is no distinction, but I think there is the potential for a distinction or a choice to be made in relation to the infrastructure that you use on a daily basis. And certainly in kind of my practice and some of the initiatives that I work on outside of an artistic context, there is an effort to make a separation between these things. But I think that it's broadly impossible in terms of perception to make that shift, because even if you're not using a computer, you're thinking in relation to it, and you're also thinking in relation to a broader network. And so as a result of that, we don't do things in the same way as we used to. For example, in this conversation, because it's being recorded, and because by you and also intelligence services that are doing, mass surveillance on all of our devices, that has an effect on the things that I do and do not say, and the way in which I speak. So even when we are supposedly doing something that is not digital, it's still affected by this kind of network.
Okay. So we're going to get into more about like a more concrete topic. So in Regimen of Visibility and Vigilance in the Era of Digital Identity, Alejandra Lopez Gabriela Diz investigates the relations between data and the self. She says, thanks to the possibility of storing, recording, and replaying data from human daily behavior, humans are creating a reflective mirror, one that is interactive and capable of driving an actor to comply. So, like Gabriela Diz said, I believe we're extending ourselves into another platform. It is not us, but it is us at the same time. So Instagram, for example, despite not using it, you must imagine that it becomes the way that I see and react and understand people on there, but it's not really them. And at the same time, this sort of like scrolling memory list also becomes the way that I see and I think about myself, not just how others see myself, how others see me. So you talked about this idea of how with like Kim Kardashian, we're spending time with these sort of highly constructed identities. But at the same time, there's also how we're digesting each other is through this sort of very constructed and very meticulously crafted identity online. So what are your thoughts on sort of humans' identity and behavior in relation to to this idea?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're not aside from the Kardashians. I think that we all experience reality in that way to one degree or another, just that they're a kind of extreme example. A thinker who has had a big impact on me, probably kind of throughout my life in terms of reading books and thinking, is the philosopher Giorgio Agamben, but particularly in the last 5 years, because of the connection between what he's been writing and the work that I've been doing. And Agamben, about 5 years ago, published a book called The Highest Poverty, which took as its subject monastic rules. And I work on something called A Monastery, and it looks at the idea of reimagining a monastery in this moment,
right,
in order to produce a different way of life.
Mm-hmm.
And in Agamben's work, what it elucidated for me was this looking at the monastic rules. And the rules that govern monasteries are very, very interesting in respect to this kind of question of the relationship of the self in reference to external infrastructure and external ways of perceiving oneself.
Yeah.
Because under the idea of the rule is essentially to create unity with the way in which one lives one's life and the way in which that life is expressed. And we live in this situation in which the way in which we express our lives and the way in which we live our lives is divided, and they are separate things. And so this idea of the production of a form of life where the infrastructure and the external reference of the self merge with the experience of life. And you see this in the monastic context, because the monks live by a rule that produces their life, and their life therefore produces the rule. And I'm very interested in that idea, and I think that it's probably an ongoing aspiration, at least within the kind of Western lineage of thought. And I'm interested in how we confront that question in this moment, in which we have a set of new emerging technologies which only further mediate our experience of reality. In the examples of things like blockchain, where I would assume in the future, based on the current trajectory of much of these technologies, would have to produce their identity in some form on this immutable ledger that is separate from the self, and it raises very complicated questions about what identity is. Emerging technologies like augmented reality, which personalize your perception of reality. There are a lot of technologies coming in this moment that present real challenges to how you even conceive of the self.
Okay. I have 3 more questions. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So a bit more on this topic. I'm just adding a bit more. How can I say it? References to discuss this topic through. So Bernard Stiegler, who's a French philosopher, he questions if industrial and large-scale developments of what he calls memo technologies, which are devices involved in the practice of aiding memory, will constitute in a displacement of memory. So thus, like, if you misplace a mobile phone, it's the equivalent to losing track of the numbers of people you're in contact with, and that consequently will come with the realization that they're no longer in your own memory, but inside the devices. So this theory of memo technologies structurally reformats how humans retain knowledge and memorize their lives. But I think this can also potentially be applied to the idea of the loss of self, or the misplacement of self and identity in the context we talked about. So if we entertain the notion that we see each other and our own identity partially or wholly through the presence and appearance of them and ourselves online, does the loss of the device constitute a displacement of our identity? And so could these technologies not just displace memory, like Stiegler said, but also displace our identities and what our notion of self is?
Interesting. complex question, and I have a lot of respect for Deepa's work and thinking. Could you maybe just give me the end part of that question again?
Yeah, so if we entertain the notion that we see each other and our own identity partially and wholly through the presence and appearance of them online, does the loss of the device, the mobile phone, for example, constitute the displacement of our identity?
I mean, I think there's an interesting constellation of thoughts that you've brought together there. I'm certainly somebody who suffers somewhat from a kind of memory loss with respect to technology, and very, in terms of the way that I organize my entire life, I'm very much like a kind of cyborg in this respect, of like, the reason why I can do so many things is because I've developed lots of mnemonic techniques for situating parts of my knowledge, but also my ability to kind of activate that knowledge into external systems, so that I don't have to think about it all the time. And you know, this is it's a very, like, Foucault's theory of biopolitics that speaks to this very strongly.
What was it called? Biotechnologies?
Biopolitics.
Biopolitics.
Foucault. Yes, I do agree with that to an extent, but I don't know if I agree with it in the sense that it's necessarily a unique situation, because, you know, we maybe compare the mobile phone to a notebook in which you journal your kind of most private thoughts.
Yeah.
In many ways, to lose that object is a kind of equivalent to it. I think, and this is disruptive to what I said to the last question in terms of this idea of the attempt to produce a form of life.
Yeah.
But I think an interesting sphere of thinking that's emerging in this moment is through people like Donna Haraway, and through recent understandings in biology and science, is this idea that the sovereign self is a contradiction, and that we are more like a coral reef. So this idea of symbiosis, or I think it's also referred to as endosymbiosis. I can send you that later. But the idea that no individual is sovereign, no individual is a closed system, but instead we are like coral reefs. So the bacteria in our stomachs, the devices that we use, we exist within this kind of porous, interconnected constellation of being. And I think that this is the kind of thinking that helps us process much of what we're experiencing in the present, and also speaks to the direction and trajectories of technologies that are emerging in this moment, because it's very obvious that the kind of next stage in the development of advanced technologies is entirely orientated around biotechnology. And many people arguing from a kind of cyborg anthropological perspective would say that, you know, the mobile phone is already a prosthesis of the self, and it already constitutes a part of yourself in the same way as, you know, much more kind of ancient tools and technologies do much the same. But that with biotechnology, we're entering into a new sphere in which those things are actually very markedly like part of our body.
Yeah.
We begin to edit genes, and we begin to insert things into our bodies, and we begin to upgrade parts of ourselves in much more invasive ways than we previously have.
Transhumanism in that regard, right?
I think there's a transhumanism speaks to a very particular
Okay.
kind of trajectory of thought, which is focused on. It has how to put it. I guess it has like a human suprematist angle within it that takes the human as presumes the human to be the most advanced organism on Earth, and that it's only natural that we would become more advanced through the use of technology. And I think it's speaking to that partly, but through a different discourse. So in Haraway's most recent book, Staying with the Trouble, she talks about this idea of if we are to engage with these technologies, then we should use them to merge with species that are going extinct and become these kind of hybrid entities. So I think there are these different, there are different trajectories, but they all, are a bit strange.
Yeah. Quickly, you mentioned, you said that the mobile phone constitutes a part of the self, like older technologies. Could you mention a few examples of that?
Older technologies.
That constitute a part of yourself. It's just so that I have an idea.
I'm just having a think in terms of what would be the equivalent. I mean, I guess I really, if I was to make a kind of direct line, books are a technology. The ability to write and produce books there's quite an equivalence there. But another technology that becomes an extension of the self would even be like just having the ability to electricity, to have light in your home. That becomes, it completely augments reality. And so your ability to stay up late at night and to do certain things as a result of lighting is, whilst it seems hard to perceive of it as a technology now, because it's just part of the fabric of reality, it would be an example of that.
Okay. So what was the question I had here? So we sort of all know that social media and the internet operate, very differently from real life. But people are submitted to a sort of digital augmented society that treats imitation and authenticity similarly. Some of the things we discussed before. So the effects of technology are, causing a change. Are not just causing a change in our perception or concepts, but are steadily without resistance altering our sense and patterns of perception. According to McLuhan, the only person who can resist this encounter is the artist, as he or she is an expert in being aware of sense perception. Is that statement still true?
That's an interesting statement. I think that art right now is in a very difficult place, because I think that too much it has professionalized and capitulated to market dynamics, that I think that it's difficult to say in a blanketed way, yes, that statement is still true.
Yeah.
I do think that it's true in respect to maybe the archetype of the artist that McLuhan is talking about. Those individuals that are kind of seeking some form of truth, whether it be a kind of inexplicable truth or a truth of self, and will compromise at nothing to reach that truth. I think those artists still exist, but they don't necessarily, and I think increasingly so, that many of those individuals don't self-identify as artists within the public sphere in this moment. But a certain archetype of people, certainly that statement is true for, that develop a different kind of sense perception. It's just that the art world has become less and less a place in which one can express that way of being and that way of sensing the world.
Okay. And then my last question is, what are the upsides of the perceptions of reality changing? Or maybe like just having this discourse. Well, no, actually, no. What are the upsides of the perceptions of reality changing?
Okay, so I'd take two things on this front. The thing that I find interesting about having a conversation around technology is that it allows you to re-examine in a slightly naive way things that have always been present, and allows you to challenge the status quo or the presumed truth of a scenario. But in reality, they're really just reflections of questions that we've always been asking. And an example that I would give of that is if you take something like virtual reality. When virtual reality, came into being for the third or fourth time, but at a level of greater sophistication a couple of years ago, I spent a lot of time thinking about and practicing and experimenting with the question of what makes virtual reality different from psychedelic drugs, and what can virtual reality do that psychedelics can't do. And in a process of experimentation, came to the conclusion that virtual reality was a very, very primitive technology, and that actually it had very little to offer. But the very fact of its existence, and the fact that it created the conditions or the context in which I could ask those questions, I thought is of enormous value. But in terms of being able to challenge one's perception of reality, there are much more ancient forms of technology that are much more powerful. And in many ways, emergent technology is just a portal or a gateway into beginning to access those things that you wouldn't necessarily access in your everyday life.
Is the fear of, I mean, a lot of people I think find the idea that we spend so much time online and let's entertain the notion that we're externalizing the self and simulation and all these things. What is sort of the positives that people could take from that if they lose the ability to distinguish between reality and virtuality?
I think the only reason that people assign this to technology or these anxieties is because all those things are already present, and it's just like a mirror held up to that fact. So a good example of this in respect to technology is the idea of racist artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence isn't racist. Our society is racist.
Right.
And it's holding up a mirror because it derives an expression of that thinking and historical data sets that make that artificial intelligence racist. So I think that there's a kind of false dichotomy there in terms of the way in which we perceive these things. So technology can only make society good in the same way as people can only make society better.
Right. Okay. I mean, I could ask you questions all day, but I think maybe I should end it there.
Well, hopefully that's been helpful.
Yeah, it's been incredibly helpful. It's been super great actually talking to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the very considerate and well thought through questions, because often when I do these things, I'm just throwing, random questions, but it's very clear that you took time to really consider your research. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I had
to really think.
Well, I'm glad that I asked questions that didn't come with immediate answers. I think the whole point of me doing this is to try to get questions that I don't know the answer to, and hopefully challenge some of the people I talk to as well in some way.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. I'll get this transcribed to you within a period, and you can have a look through and add or come with more references or change anything. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate
cool.
it. Yeah. Take care.
Have a lovely day. It was wonderful speaking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.